There is a particular kind of silence that grows in a marriage. It's not the peaceful quiet of companionship. No, it is the dense, velvet silence of things that are carefully, deliberately not said. For 30 years, I lived inside that silence. And for 30 years, my husband, Charles, gave me the perfect gift to hold it all, a beautiful, empty journal. On the morning of our 30th wedding anniversary, as the sun painted our familiar tablecloth with the same old light, he slid that 30th journal toward me, wrapped in its usual silver paper. And on that morning, I did something that would break 30 years of silence with the softest sound imaginable, the gentle thud of truth, landing on a polished mahogany table. I gave them all back. All 29 journals, filled with the woman he never bothered to read. Today, I'm not here to shout my pain. I'm here to show you the quiet, seismic power of a story finally told. The first journal arrived wrapped in the soft light of a hotel balcony, the kind of light that feels borrowed from a movie. The sea air was a perfume we thought we'd invented just for us. He was handsome then, not just in my eyes but in the way the world sees a tall man with a good smile. He held the little package bound in a ribbon and his eyes held that shine of a plan perfectly executed. For your thoughts, Eleanor, the beautiful thoughts of my beautiful wife. And I felt a soaring in my chest, a lifting so profound I thought my feet might leave the tiles. I saw it then as the highest romance, a gesture from a deeper soul. He wanted my innermost self. He was providing a sanctuary for it. I would fill this book with our love and one day perhaps we would read it together, gray and giddy remembering. That was the story I told myself. That was the first page I wrote in my own mind before my pen ever touched that pristine paper. It took a year to fill. It is pressed with flowers from a path in Santorini, a cocktail napkin from a bar where we danced, the ink is bubbled in one spot from a drop of rain or maybe a tear of joy I can't recall. The handwriting is large, looping, hopeful. It speaks of a future so bright it had to be squinted at. It details the way he laughed from his stomach, the way his hand felt on the small of my back, a claim I was thrilled to have staked. It is a young woman's book. A believer's book. And when the anniversary came, that first one rolling around with the weight of a new tradition, he produced another. The same but different. A deeper blue. To record our wonderful life, he said. His smile was the same. The ritual was born, and I was still too much in love with the man and with the idea of being a wife who receives beautiful journals to see the seam in the fabric. By the third gift the seam began to show. It was a tiny thing. A pulled thread. His mother had come for Thanksgiving. She had praised everything in the house, the china, the centerpiece, the polish on the cutlery, and yet by the end of the evening I felt curiously winded, as if I'd been running a race I hadn't known I was in. In the journal that night my writing was smaller. I wrote Catherine admired the linen napkins but showed me the proper way to fold them. She said it was how Charles's grandmother had done it. He smiled and said he loved seeing the tradition in our home. I read that back now and I see the code. I see the young woman trying to write the problem into a non-problem. Trying to fold the criticism into the narrative of a happy home. I didn't write the feeling. The feeling of being gently corrected into a corner. I didn't write that his smile at her instruction felt like a choice and the choice was not me. The fourth journal, the fifth. They began to fill with a different kind of content. Not just the what but the why. Not just the event but the emotional weather of it. The slow dawning that the journal was not a bridge between us but a repository for everything that would not cross it. I wrote of a promotion he got. The dinner to celebrate. How he talked of his team, his strategy, his vision. I wrote I am so proud of him. I said let's open that special wine. He said he was too tired. He fell asleep on the sofa. I drank a glass alone looking at the moon. That was the first entry that felt like a letter no one would ever receive. The beginning of the unspoken contract. He would give me the beautiful vessel. I would pour into it the things he did not have the time or the inclination to hear. It was not malice. Not then. It was a gradual, gentle delegation. He was a busy man building a life for us. My job was to be happy. To be beautiful. To be thoughtful. And if there were thoughts that troubled that picture, well, there was the book. The beautiful blue book. The true shift came with the seventh journal. The one with the dark cover like a bruise. That was the year we lost the baby. The first and only time I was pregnant. The shock, the grief, a physical thing, a hollowing out. He was quiet. He held me but his silence had a stiff shape. I tried to talk about it weeks later. Tears at the kitchen sink. He put a hand on my shoulder and said his mother had told him women are strong about these things. That we have a resilience men don't understand. That it was best not to dwell. To move forward. To be strong. I stood there, the water running, and felt my grief be orphaned. It had no home in his arms. It had no sanction in his world. Where was it to go? That night I opened the 7th journal. My hand shook. I did not write to him. I did not write my darling. I wrote the date. And I wrote today. I understood. My sorrow is mine alone to carry. He has given me a suitcase for it. This book. I must pack it away neatly and not mention the weight. That was the moment the gift revealed its true nature. It was not a treasure chest. It was a piece of luggage. From there the ritual hardened. The giving became less a romantic event and more a marital duty. An administrative task. Happy anniversary, Ellie. For your thoughts. The kiss on the cheek. The smile that didn't reach his eyes anymore. The journal would be set aside on the hall table. Later I would take it up to my writing desk. The entries became more observational. Less about feeling and more about documenting. I was becoming a secretary of my own life. September 12th. Catherine came for tea. She remarked the gardenias are not thriving. Suggested a different fertilizer. Charles agreed immediately. He did not look at me. November 3rd. Dinner party. Charles told the story of our honeymoon. He got the island wrong. I did not correct him. No one noticed. January 18th. I thought I heard him say I love you in his sleep. I am not certain. The journals were no longer gifts. They were audits. And with each one I understood more deeply that his love for me was conditional upon a certain quietness, a certain order. My thoughts were welcome only as long as they were beautiful. Only as long as they could be sealed under a leather cover and placed on a shelf. The pain point was not the giving of the book. It was the relief in his eyes when I took it. The unspoken thank God that's handled. My inner life was a department he had outsourced. I was the manager of my own loneliness, tasked with filing it appropriately so as not to disrupt the main business of our life, which was the appearance of his success. By the 20th journal the charade was complete. I would receive it. I would thank him. We both performed our lines flawlessly. It was a play we had staged for so long we had forgotten the audience was gone. The gift was now a symbol of everything. We did not say, a tomb for 1,000 small deaths. A disagreement swallowed. A hope unvoiced. A joke he didn't get. A tear wiped quickly before he could see. It was all there. The invisible labor of the heart. The emotional management. And he never once, not once in all those years, asked what I wrote about. Never wondered if the books were full. Never glanced at a page left open. The greatest insult was not his neglect. It was his absolute confidence that whatever was in those books was appropriate. Manageable. Safe. Because if it wasn't, wouldn't I have said something? He gave me the voice and assumed because he never heard it raised it must be singing. That is what I mean when I say it was the gift that wasn't a gift. A gift implies a desire for the other to have joy. This was a tool for peacekeeping. His peace. It was a beautiful, elegant muzzle. And I, the willing dog who learned to love the feel of the leather because it was given with a hand that also fed me and sheltered me and called me wife. I confused the muzzle for a jeweled collar. It took me 30 years to feel the difference. To feel how the strap had worn a path in my fur, a hidden groove that only I could feel when the wind blew a certain way. On that 30th morning I finally reached up. Not in rage, in a slow dawning clarity. And I understood I could simply unbuckle it. The giving of the empty book was never an act of love. It was the foundational act of the silence. And my returning them full was not an act of war. It was simply the breaking of that silence, not with a shout but with the deafening weight of all the words he'd asked me to keep to myself. The piano bench arrived on a Tuesday. It came not in a moving van but in the trunk of his mother's car, a dark monstrous shape shrouded in moving blankets. She directed the men, Charles and a cousin, with a voice of quiet command. Not there. A little to the left. Yes, that is the spot. It was not a question. It was a coronation. The thing was heavy mahogany carved with grim fruit and swooping leaves. It had a presence. It did not sit on the floor, it occupied the space. It dominated the room from the moment they set it down. Catherine ran a hand over its surface, a gesture of possession. This was my mother-in-law's, she said. And her mother's before her. It belongs with a piano. With a family. Charles stood beside her, his hand on the wood mirroring her pride. Look at that craftsmanship, Ellie, he said. You don't see that anymore. And I looked. I saw a dark, heavy box. I saw an altar to a past I had not lived. It was not just a piece of furniture. It was a transfer of power. A delivery of history. Catherine's visits always had a quality of inspection, but with the bench installed she had planted a flag. This was now an outpost of her territory. She would come over and her eyes would go to it first as if checking on a sleeping child. She'd remark on the dust on the lid, a subtle comment on my housekeeping. She'd adjust the placement of the metronome on top by a quarter inch. The bench was her proxy. And Charles, he adored it. He loved the story. He loved the weight of it. He loved that it was an heirloom, something of substance, something that proved his lineage. He would often sit on it, not to play the piano but just to sit. He'd run his fingers over the carvings, a distant look in his eyes. He was not here in our living room. He was in his grandmother's parlor, a good boy, being quiet, being good. The bench was his time machine. And it was useless. The piano was seldom played. I had taken lessons as a girl, but the atmosphere, it was not conducive to music. The bench's lid was heavy and inside was a cavernous space. It held nothing but the faint smell of old wood and disuse. I once suggested we might store sheet music inside. Or Christmas decorations. A spare blanket. Charles looked at me, genuinely startled. Oh no, he said. It's not for storage. It's the bench. You don't put things in it. You just have it. That was the rule. The bench was to be preserved as a relic. Its function was its existence. Its purpose was to be admired and to remind us of where Charles came from. Of who really set the tone. For years it was just that. A symbol of my exclusion. A physical block of the world that existed before me, a world that still held his primary loyalty. I'd dust it resentfully, feeling the grooves of the carving snag my cloth. I'd see my reflection warped in its polished surface. I was the temporary thing in the room. The bench was permanent. It would outlast me. I knew that. It had seen generations of women come and go. I was just the current occupant of the house, the current wife. The bench was the true wife. The eternal one. The idea came to me slowly, a quiet rebellion taking root. It was after I finished the 10th journal. I was looking for a place to put it. The shelf in my closet was full. I couldn't bear to put it in a box in the attic with old clothes. It needed a place. A specific place. My eyes fell on the bench. That great hollow thing. That sacred empty space he forbade me to use. A perfect irony took shape in my mind. What if the very object that symbolized his allegiance to a past that ignored me could become the guardian of my secret present? What if I took her bench and I made it mine? It was a logistical problem. The key was lost, Catherine had said with a sigh. A shame, but the lock is original. We mustn't force it. So the lid stayed shut. A sealed tomb. I needed it open. I waited for a day when Charles was at a conference and Catherine was visiting a sister in another state. I called a locksmith from a pay phone. I did not want the call on our bill. When he arrived, a kind older man with gentle hands, I told him a partial truth. My husband's family heirloom. The key lost. We were so worried about damaging it. Could he make a new key without hurting the lock? He understood. He worked with a delicate touch. He extracted the old lock mechanism with care, made a wax impression, created a new key. It took an hour. I paid him in cash from the grocery money. I tipped him well. He handed me the key, a small cold brass thing. Thank you, ma'am, he said. A beautiful piece. It's good to see it cared for. Oh, it will be cared for, I said. I have just the things to put in it. The moment the door closed, I was alone with the bench and the key. My heart thumped, not with fear but with a thrilling sense of trespass. This was my first real secret. My first act of ownership. I knelt before it. The key turned with a smooth, decisive click. A sound of permission. A sound of unlocking. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was a vast dark space lined with faded crimson velvet, worn thin in patches. It smelled not just of old wood but of time itself. Of closed spaces. It was perfect. I brought the journals down one by one. Not just the new one. All of them. From the closet shelf, from the box under my bed. I laid them in the bench in order. A chronology of silence. They fit as if the space had been made for them. The first 10 lay flat. Then I began to stack them upright along the back. They filled the depth. When they were all inside, I closed the lid. The click was final. I sat back on my heels and looked at the bench. It looked exactly the same. A solemn carved monolith. But now it held my life. My truth. It was no longer just his mother's bench. It was my vault. Every year after that, the ritual had a new step. Charles would give me the journal. I would thank him. I would place it on my desk. And when I had filled it, when the final entry was written, I would wait for another empty house. I would kneel before the bench. I would unlock it. The creak of the hinge was my confessional screen opening. I would place the newest volume with the others. I would look at the growing collection, a silent city of blue spines. I would run my hand over them, a pastor blessing a congregation. Then I would close the lid, lock it, and the secret would be sealed away beneath the wood his mother had chosen. The bench's meaning transformed completely for me. It was no longer a symbol of oppression. It was my co-conspirator. It was the keeper of my sanity. When Catherine would visit and make her pointed remarks, I would look at the bench and think, you have no idea what I keep inside you. You think you own this object, but I have repurposed its heart. When Charles would sit on it, oblivious, staring into the middle distance, I would think, you are sitting on my life. The weight you feel is not just wood. It became a private joke, the deepest kind of joke, one that carries you through decades. I had taken the very artifact of my exclusion and turned it into the container for my selfhood. I had hollowed out a space for myself within the edifice of his family. I began to see the bench as a metaphor for our entire marriage. Beautiful, imposing, solid to the outside world. A symbol of tradition and stability. And inside, a hidden compartment. A private locked space where the real things lived. The things not for display. The things too fragile or too dangerous or too true for the open air. Charles lived on the polished surface. I lived inside in the velvet dark with my pages and my ink. He thought the surface was the whole of it. He never imagined the interior life. There was a power in that knowledge, a cold, steady power. It allowed me to perform my wifely duties with a kind of detached grace. I could smile at parties. I could host his mother. I could listen to his stories. Because I knew that at the end of the day I had a place where the real Eleanor lived. A place he had provided the shell for but had never thought to look inside. The bench was my sanctuary and my prison both. The only place where I was fully real. And as long as I had that space, as long as I could open that lid and see the physical evidence of my own consciousness, I could survive. I could breathe. For 20 years that bench held my words. It held the slow leak of my spirit. It held the quiet catastrophe of a woman disappearing into a wife. And it held it all with perfect dignity. It never judged. It never told. It simply accepted each new volume the way the earth accepts a seed. Holding it in the dark until some unknown future season when it might be brought to light. It was the most faithful friend I had. More faithful than my husband. For it held every part of me without flinching. It asked for no explanations. It demanded no beautiful thoughts. It just took what I gave it and kept it safe. It was the one thing in that house that truly knew me. Knew the weight and the shape and the color of my silence. And it kept my secret until the day I decided a secret was no longer enough. Until the day I decided the interior life demanded to be seen. And on that day I did not destroy the bench. I used it for its intended final purpose. To present the truth. I simply opened the lid and let the contents speak. The ink of invisibility. It is a particular shade. It is not the bold black of a headline or the vibrant blue of a love note. It is the soft gray of twilight, the color of something fading. It is the color a thought turns when it knows it will never be heard aloud. My pen hovered over those pages and what flowed out was not just words. It was the evidence of a vanishing. A careful documentation of my own erasure. You see, when you write for an audience of one and that one is yourself, the writing changes. It stops being communication. It becomes proof. A proof of life. A proof of feeling. A testament that says I was here. I saw this. It hurt. At first the ink was hopeful. It reached. It was a bridge thrown across the space between his chair and mine. Darling, today you seemed tired. I wanted to ask about your day but you fell asleep. I hope tomorrow is lighter. That was a message in a bottle tossed into a sea I still believed had another shore. But the bottles never washed up anywhere. They just sank. So the ink began to change. It turned observational, clinical almost. If I could not write to him, I would write about him. I became an anthropologist in my own home, a scholar of the strange rituals of the man I married. Subject returns at 7:19 p.m. Greeting is verbal but perfunctory. Eats dinner while commenting on news headlines. Does not inquire about my day. Retires to study by 8:30. It was a way to distance the pain, to turn the ache into data. The ink was a buffer against the raw feeling. Then the ink began to map the emptiness. It charted the silences. It measured the distance between his "good morning" and his "good night." I would write about the weather outside because the weather inside was a constant low-pressure system, a steady drizzle of disappointment. Rain today, heavier in the afternoon, streets flooded. Charles mentioned the city's poor drainage. I mentioned the petunias drowning in their pots. He did not reply. The ink held the place where a conversation should have been. It filled the negative space around his indifference. I wrote about his mother with a scribe's detached hand. Catherine visited. She wore a green suit. She criticized the arrangement of the roses. She said they were too crowded. She said a rose needs room to breathe. Charles agreed. He rearranged them after she left. There is no exclamation point there. No can you believe her. Just the facts. The ink absorbed the insult so I wouldn't have to carry it in my body. It was a transfusion. I bled onto the page so I wouldn't stain the furniture. The real transformation of the ink came with the other women. Not women of flesh and blood perhaps. Maybe they were, but in my mind they were the women he might have preferred. The ghost women. The women I saw in his eyes when he looked through me. I began to write to them. You would know what to say to him at this party. Your laugh would be louder. Your opinion sharper. You would not let his comment lie there like a dead thing. You would know how to pick it up and hand it back to him. I do not. The ink became a dialogue with my own inadequacies. I poured my jealousy, my insecurity into that blue leather, and it sank into the page like water into sand, leaving only a damp stain of shame. Then the ink turned forensic. It collected evidence. The receipt for the necklace I never received. The scent of a perfume on his collar that was not mine, not his mother's, something floral and cheap. A phone number on a golf scorecard with a feminine hand. I did not confront. I documented. Item 1. Slip of paper. Digits in red ink. Found in blazer pocket. Taped to page 42. I was building a case. But a case for whom? For a judge who would never hold court. For a jury of my own lonely thoughts. The ink was the clerk of a silent courtroom where I was the plaintiff, the witness, and the only one in attendance. The most painful ink was the ink of nostalgia for a love that may never have existed. I would write about our early days, but now through the lens of suspicion. He brought me coffee in bed that first year. Was he ever truly listening, or was he just performing the part of a husband? Did I invent the man I thought he was? The ink here is blurred. I must have cried. I do not recall. That ink was corrosive. It ate back through time, poisoning the few good memories I had clung to. It rewrote my own history in shades of doubt. As the years piled up, the ink began to write about the journal itself. It became self-referential. This book is nearly full. Another year. Another blue cover. He will not notice I have filled it. He will only see the empty one he gives me next. The ink was now conscious of its own role in the charade. It was a prisoner writing on the walls of its cell, describing the lock. I wrote lists. Lists are the refuge of an overwhelmed mind. Things I meant to say today. 1. The doctor called about the mole. 2. The car is making a sound. 3. Your son needs you to call him. 4. I am afraid of the mole. 5. I am afraid of the sound. 6. I am afraid you don't care about any of this. The ink held the fears in neat rows, contained them so they wouldn't spill out and ruin the carpet. I wrote dialogues. Imagined conversations where I was brave. Me, that hurt my feelings. Him, I didn't realize. Me, well now you do. Him, I'm sorry, I'll do better. Then underneath in smaller, angrier script, this will never happen. The ink was a rehearsal for a play that would never open. A practice for a strength I could not muster. The ink recorded the small betrayals of the body. The first gray hair, the ache in a knee in the morning. The way my reflection began to soften at the edges, to blur. I look like a photograph left in the sun. The colors are fading. The features are less distinct. He has not taken a picture of me in years. The ink tried to pin the evaporating me to the page. To say this was my face. This was my hand. I existed here. In the final journals the ink became spare. Poetic. It was all that was left when the anger had burned off and the sadness had evaporated. Just the essence. Frost on the window. A single bird. The kettle's whistle. His key in the lock. The space between the whistle and the turn of the key. That is my life. That ink was no longer a cry. It was an observation. A final quiet understanding. The ink had become the silence it was meant to hold. It had done its job so well it had turned into the thing itself. And that is the ultimate truth of the ink of invisibility. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It simply records the light fading. It notes the temperature drop. It marks the passage of time in a room where time has stopped mattering. It is the sound of a soul whispering to itself, I am still here. I am still here. I am still here until the whisper becomes the only sound it knows how to make. And when the last page is filled, the whisper has a place to live. It has a shape, a weight. You can hold it in your hand. You can close the cover. And the silence that remains outside the book is no longer your silence. It is his. You have given your silence a form and passed it back to him. And the ink, now dry and permanent, is the witness that will not blink. It will not forget. It will not forgive. It will simply be a record of the invisible made visible. A testament written in the color of dust and dusk and the soft inside of a vein. The color of a life lived in the margins. The anniversary of awakening. It sounds like a holiday, a festive day marked on a calendar with a star. It was not. It was a day like any other day, the sun performing its usual arc, the house holding its usual breath. I woke at the same time. The bed was its own continent, the space between us a calm wide sea. I rose and made the coffee. The smell was the same. The sound of the pot choking its last drops was the same. I set the table. The china clinked its familiar song. I looked out the window at the maple tree. It had grown from a spindly thing to a towering giant over 30 years. It witnessed everything. Its leaves were just beginning to turn a blush of gold at the very edges. A change so subtle you would miss it if you weren't looking. I dressed. A simple dress. Blue, of course. He liked me in blue. I did not choose it for him. I chose it out of habit. The fabric felt familiar against my skin, a second skin I had worn for decades. I brushed my hair. I looked at my face in the mirror. The lines were there, of course. The story of every smile I had faked, every night I had cried quietly into a pillow, every dawn I had greeted with a hope that had grown thinner and more brittle. I did not look sad. I looked resolved. My eyes had settled into a kind of quiet knowing. The frantic light, the searching look had gone out of them years ago. What was left was a calm pool. Still, deep, unrippled by his coming or going. He came down the stairs. His steps had a particular cadence. I could recognize them in a crowded train station. The sound of my life's warden. He was handsome still. Age had been kind to him in a way it had not been to me. It had given him authority, distinction. It had given me invisibility. He kissed my cheek. His lips were dry. A glancing touch. A transaction. Happy anniversary, Ellie. His voice was warm, but the warmth was from a furnace banked for the night. There was no fire in it. Then he presented it. The box. The silver paper. The ribbon. It sat on the table between us like a third person. An expected guest. For a long moment I simply looked at it. I did not look at him. I looked at the box. I saw not a gift but an artifact. The 30th in a series of beautifully wrapped dismissals. Each one a stone placed carefully on my chest over the years. This was the 30th stone. And I realized I could not breathe. Not with the dramatic gasp of suffocation, but with the shallow acceptance of a weight you have borne so long you forget it is killing you. The feeling that rose in me was not anger. Anger is a hot thing, a spurting thing. This was cold, clean, sharp as a surgeon's blade. It was clarity. It was the final grain of sand. You build a pile one grain at a time. You swear each grain is nothing. It is dust. It is insignificant. Then you add one more grain, the 30,000th grain, and the entire pile shifts. It collapses not with a roar but with a sigh. A release of physics. That was what happened in my heart. A silent structural failure. I saw the entire ritual laid bare before me. The theater of it. His role to provide the empty vessel. My role to be grateful for the emptiness. To fill it with my noise so he wouldn't have to hear it. The anniversary was not a celebration of us. It was a yearly renewal of this contract. A signing again in silver paper and blue leather. I had been a willing signatory for 29 years. I had believed my signature meant I was part of something. Now I saw it only bound me to my own silence. My eyes moved from the box to his face. He was waiting, not for my joy, for my compliance, for the performance of gratitude that would absolve him for another year. He would go to work today and tell his colleagues got Ellie her journal. She loves them, and he would believe it. Because the performance was all he ever saw. He never saw the woman behind the curtain. He saw the curtain, a lovely blue curtain that never moved. I thought of all the mornings, the thousands of breakfasts, the words not spoken, the news of my body, of my heart, of my mind that I had swallowed down with my toast. I thought of the journals sleeping in the dark beneath the piano bench. They were not just books. They were the echo of every swallowed word, the ghost of every feeling I had translated into acceptable ink. They were the shadow life, the real life, and he had never asked to see it. Not once. His engagement ended with the giving. The giving was the point. It was the act of charity that made him the good husband. The thoughtful man. My receiving it made me the good wife. The thoughtful woman. We were both trapped in the admiration of the gesture, never questioning the void it carried. And in that clean cold clarity I made a decision. It was not a decision to fight. It was a decision to stop. To cease participation. To end the ritual. The contract was null. I would not accept the 30th stone. I would not sign my name again. I placed my napkin on the table. The linen was crisp. I smoothed it. A final act of order. I stood up. The legs of the chair made a soft sound on the floor. A ordinary sound, but in that room it was a thunderclap. He looked up from his paper. His eyes held a question but not the right one. He thought I was going to the kitchen for more juice. He thought I had forgotten something. His confusion was a tiny thing, a spark that died in the air between us. Ellie, that name, that diminutive, that soft cut down of my given self. It hung in the air. I did not answer it. To answer would be to re-enter the play. I was exiting the stage. I walked away from the table. My steps were not loud. They were deliberate. I walked past the kitchen door. I walked into the living room. The morning light was long and golden, cutting the dust in the air into visible slices. I walked toward the piano. Toward the bench. I could feel his eyes on my back, perhaps. Or perhaps he had already retreated behind his paper, baffled but unwilling to pursue it. It did not matter. I was in my own world now, a world of sharp edges and brilliant light. Every object in the room looked different. They looked like what they were. Just objects. Not symbols of a life, not anchors of a past. Just a vase. Just a lamp. Just a heavy carved bench. I knelt. My knees protested a creak of their own. I touched the lid. The wood was smooth, cool under my palms. This was the moment. The hinge of my life. On one side 30 years of careful silence. On the other a future of unknown sound. I did not hesitate. I took the key from its hiding place, taped beneath the lowest keyboard. A childish hiding spot. He never played. He would never find it. The key turned. The lock gave its familiar soft click. A sound that had always meant secrecy. Today it meant revelation. I lifted the lid. The inside was dark, a cave of crimson velvet and blue leather. The smell of old paper and time rose to meet me. It was the smell of my own soul. I began to remove them. One by one. The first one was so light. The pages almost fragile. The last one was heavy, dense with ink. I stacked them in my arms. They were awkward. They wanted to slide. I held them close to my chest. This was the closest I had held my own heart in years. I stood up. The weight was profound. It was the weight of my witness. My testimony. It was not a burden. It was evidence. I carried them back to the dining room. He was standing now, the paper discarded on his chair. He was staring. His face was a blank page. He could not process the image. The wife. The books. The open bench in the other room. The equation would not compute. What in God's name, where did you get those? His voice was tight, not with concern for me. With a violation of order. His order. His mother's bench. His house. Where did I get the right to produce this avalanche of blue? I did not answer. Answers were part of the old contract. I walked to his place at the table. I laid the stack down beside his plate. It made a solid sound. A thud of reality. Then I took the first journal. The honeymoon journal. I opened it. The pages whispered. I found the first page. The girlish script. The exuberant loops. My darling Charles. I placed it open on his plate. Right on the china. The words faced up. My young love lay there among the toast crumbs. A spectacle. An offering. A repatriation of something he had discarded long ago. You gave me these. Every one. You said they were for my thoughts. Here they are. All of them. My voice surprised me. It was not shaky. It was not loud. It was clear. Flat. Like a newsreader stating the weather. A simple fact. Here is the truth. It is on your plate. I turned. I walked to the front hall. I took my coat from the hook. I put it on. I slid my feet into my walking shoes. The mundane actions were a liturgy. Each one a word in my new prayer. Ellie, where are you going? He was in the doorway of the dining room. He held the first journal in his hand. He looked from it to me. His eyes held the first flicker of something real. Not understanding. Not yet. But the dawning terror that something had been recorded. That a record existed. And he was responsible for it. I paused. My hand on the doorknob. The brass was cool. I looked out the little window in the door. I saw the maple tree. The street. The world. For a walk. I opened the door. I stepped through. I closed it behind me. The click was softer than the turning of the key in the bench. But it was final. The air outside was different. It was not house air. It was world air. It moved. It carried smells of grass and distant rain. It touched my face. I walked down the path. I did not look back at the house. I set off down the sidewalk. With each step the weight lifted. Not the weight of the journals. They were gone. The weight of the performance. It fell away from my shoulders like a heavy cape I had forgotten I was wearing. I was not walking away from my marriage in that moment. I was simply walking, but with each step I was leaving the woman who accepted the empty book. I was leaving her in that dining room with the silver box and the confused man. I was out here now. A woman in a blue dress with a key in her pocket and nothing in her hands. The awakening was not a dramatic bolt of light. It was the slow steady return of feeling to a limb that had fallen asleep. A prickling, a tingling, a painful glorious return to life. It was the anniversary of the end of sleeping. And I was finally awake. The quietest reckoning. It does not live in a shout. It lives in the space after a door clicks shut. It lives in the pristine geometry of a stack of books placed deliberately on a polished table. It is an absence that makes more noise than any presence ever could. When I walked out that door I did not take the storm with me. I left the storm behind me in that dining room. I had simply delivered the clouds, the barometric pressure, the charged air. The lightning, the thunder that would be his to endure alone. I walked. The neighborhood was so ordinary. A sprinkler hissing on a lawn. A child's bicycle abandoned on a path. A curtain twitching in an upstairs window. Life in its mundane costume. And with every step I felt the extraordinary thing that was happening back in the house I had left. The silence I had cultivated for 30 years was breaking. But it was breaking over him. Not me. I was in the clear air. He was now sitting in the eye of the hurricane I had gently uncorked and left on the table. My power was never in confrontation. My power was in curation. I had curated the evidence of a lifetime. I had assembled the exhibit. And then I had simply opened the gallery. I did not need to be the tour guide. The artifacts spoke for themselves. Their labels were written in my own hand. Their chronology was damning. Their sheer volume was the accusation. 29 volumes. A life measured not in years but in pages filled with the ink of solitude. The reckoning was in the weight. When he lifted that first book from his plate he was not lifting paper and leather. He was lifting the ghost of the young woman who adored him. He was holding her vanished hope in his hands. And when he saw the stack, the totem pole of blue, he was facing the physical manifestation of time. Time he had spent elsewhere. Time I had spent right here waiting and observing and writing it all down. The reckoning was a temporal one. He had to look at the mountain and understand that while he was building a career, playing a son, attending to a mother, I was building this. A parallel universe of feeling documented in neat lines on a page. The true violence of my act was its passivity. I did not attack. I presented. I did not throw the journals at him. I arranged them. I did not scream my pain. I let the pain sit quietly in book form and invited guest to his breakfast. The quietest reckoning forces the other person to become the active one. They must do the reading. They must connect the dots. They must hear the silence between the entries and understand what filled it. They must become the detective in their own crime. I imagine him in that room after I left. First the frozen confusion, the man of action with no action to take. He could not follow me. To follow would be to abandon the scene of the crime. And the crime scene was these books. He would have approached the stack. He might have touched it. He might have pulled one out from the middle, opened it at random. What would he have seen? Not a dramatic confession of hatred. Something far worse. The entry about the rainy Tuesday when he said the soup was too salty. My entry about the way the steam fogged the window and I drew a heart in it and watched it fade. The disconnect between his petty complaint and my longing for symbol for romance. The terrible mundane sadness of it. That was the shrapnel. He would have to read his own character as a supporting player in my solitary drama. He would see himself through my eyes. Not the eyes of his mother who saw a prince. Not the eyes of his colleagues who saw a leader. My eyes. The eyes that saw him come home late, that saw him choose his mother's opinion over mine, that saw him forget my birthday not with malice but with a bland neglect that was somehow more insulting. He would meet the man he was in the quiet hours. And that man was a stranger to him. A man of small dismissals and vast inattentions. The quietest reckoning strips a person of their narrative. Charles had a narrative. A good man. A provider. A faithful son. A busy executive. A husband of a quiet dependable wife. My journals presented a counter-narrative. They presented the view from the other side of that busyness, that provision, that faithfulness. They presented the cost. And the cost was me. My journals were the itemized invoice for a life spent in his shadow. And I had just laid it on his desk for payment. The power of silence is that it forces the other person to break it. He had to be the one to open the books. He had to be the one to turn the pages. He had to be the one to sit. In the growing horror of understanding. My walk was my silence continuing. His ordeal was his noise beginning. The reckoning was in the sound of his own heart thudding in his ears as he read my description of the night his mother moved into the guest house. My careful noting of his eager help with her luggage, his reluctance to help with mine from our trip the week before. The juxtaposition was a scalpel. I never wrote he loves her more. I just laid the two facts side by side. And the emptiness between them screamed. He would have to discover the receipts. The perfume. The phone number. The little fossils of betrayal I had pressed between pages like flowers. I never wrote an accusation. Just the fact. Found this. The quietest reckoning allows the evidence to condemn. It does not need a prosecutor's closing argument. The jury is the offender's own conscience. And what of his mother's bench? The sacred vessel. He would have seen it there in the living room, its maw open, a dark void in the middle of the room. He would have understood then that I had a key. That I had a secret. That the heirloom he cherished had been the vault for my rebellion. The symbol of his lineage had been co-opted. It had held my descent for decades right under his nose. The bench was no longer his mother's. It was mine. It had been the keeper of my truth. And in using it to store my journals, and in using it now to stage their revelation, I had completed the transformation. I had taken the symbol of my oppression and turned it into the weapon of my liberation. And I had done it quietly. Without a protest. Without a word. Just a key turning in a lock. The quietest reckoning is a transfer of burden. For 30 years I carried the burden of knowing. The burden of unspoken words. The burden of unmet needs. The burden of being the only one who saw the full picture of our empty marriage. With that stack of books I transferred that burden to him. I set it down at his place. Now he had to carry it. He had to know what I knew. He had to see what I saw. He had to feel the weight of all those years of my patient documented despair. My walk was light because I had left the weight behind. He would spend days in that study. I knew he would. He was a man who solved problems. And here was the biggest problem of his life laid out in 29 installments. He would try to solve it. To read it all, to understand it, to find the loophole the moment he could point to and say, see, I was good here. But the narrative was relentless. It was the drip of water on stone. No single entry was a catastrophe. Together they were an erosion. And he was left standing on the eroded ground, realizing the landscape of his life was not what he thought. The quietest reckoning is geologic. It works in deep time. When I returned, the house felt different. The air was charged with spent energy. He was in his study. The journals were gone from the table. The new gift was in the trash, its silver skin torn. I made no comment. I cleaned no mess. I left the piano bench lid open. A deliberate omission. A quiet continuing of the reckoning. Let him look at that dark open space every time he passed. Let it remind him of what was held there. Of what was hidden in plain sight. The quietest reckoning does not seek an apology. It seeks understanding. And understanding, when it comes too late, is its own life sentence. He would emerge eventually. He would look at me with new eyes. Eyes that were afraid. Because he finally saw me. And in seeing me he saw the stranger he had lived with for 30 years. He saw the depth of his own blindness. And that blindness, now cured, was a mirror showing him a man he never wanted to be. My calm, my silence after the delivery was the final stage of the reckoning. It showed him that this was not a tactic. This was a conclusion. I had reached the end of my story with him. The books were the final period. My piece was the blank page after. The reckoning was quiet because it was complete. I had said all I needed to say. I had said it over 30 years. I had just never handed him the transcript before. Once the transcript is in the record, the trial is over. The verdict is self-evident. No dramatic courtroom speech is needed. The evidence speaks for itself. And then everyone can go home. The silence after the story. It has a different texture. The old silence was heavy, a wool blanket smothering the room. This new silence is light, a linen sheet airing on a line. It is full of space, clean space. Space that belongs to me. When the last word of your truth has been spoken, when the final page has been turned and laid down, a peculiar peace descends. It is not the peace of resolution, not the happy ending of a fairy tale. It is the peace of cessation. The engine of longing has finally run out of fuel and stopped. And the quiet it leaves behind is not empty. It is spacious. It is yours. For days after the journals changed hands, the house held its breath. He was in the study, a supplicant in a library of his own failings. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, but a ghost at peace. I made tea, but only for myself. The ritual of his cup was over. I ate when I was hungry. I read books long neglected, their spines cracking with pleasure. I played music, not his jazz, not the classical records his mother approved. I played old soul music from my girlhood. I played it low. The sound was a thread connecting me to a self I had misplaced. The silence around the music was my own. No one was here to comment, to criticize, to switch it off. The silence was a room, and I was finally alone in it. He emerged on the 4th day. He looked older, not tired in the body but hollowed in the spirit. His eyes were the eyes of someone who has read a terrible report about himself and found it accurate. He stood in the doorway of the living room. I was in the chair by the window reading. I did not look up. Not from malice. From a profound lack of need. His presence no longer registered as a central fact. It was a peripheral thing, a shadow on the wall. He said my name, not Ellie, Eleanor. It sounded strange in his mouth, an unfamiliar word. I closed my book. I looked at him. I waited. There was no expectation in me. No hope for an apology that could span the canyon between us. I was simply observing. All this time, he said. His voice was cracked from disuse. You felt all this. It was not a question. It was a dawning. A terrible sunrise. I felt many things, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a guide in a museum pointing out facts on a placard. Mostly I felt alone. He flinched. The word alone was the simplest one, the most devastating. All the intricate documented betrayals boiled down to that one plain fact. He had left me alone in a house full of people. Himself. His mother. The ghost of his expectations. I had been the loneliest person in every room. I didn't know, he said. A whisper. And that was the final truth he had to swallow. He didn't know. He had not cared to know. The not knowing had been his choice, his comfort. My silence had permitted it. But my silence had also recorded it. And now he knew. The knowing was his burden. Not mine. I had already carried the burden of feeling it. He now had to carry the burden of acknowledging it. My silence after the story was the space where he had to build a new understanding of the last 30 years. And it was a ruin. He tried to speak. Sentences started and collapsed. He mentioned his mother. He mentioned pressure. He mentioned being blind. I listened. I nodded. It was like listening to a weather report for a storm that had already passed over me. I was already in the calm. He was still back in the gale trying to understand the wind speed. There was nothing to say. His reasons were his own. They were not my absolution. They were just more pages from a different story, a story about a son, a story about a man. They were not my story anymore. The silence after the story is when you stop waiting for the other person to give you the ending you want. You realize you have already written it. The ending is your survival. The ending is your quiet cup of tea in a sunny spot. The ending is the absence of the knot in your stomach when you hear his key in the lock. The lock had been turned. The key was now just a sound. We began to move around each other like satellites in decaying orbits. The habits of cohabitation remained, but they were empty of meaning. He made his own coffee. I did not buy his preferred beans. A small thing. A quiet revolution. He would look at me sometimes, a searching look. He was looking for the woman from the journals, the woman in pain. He could not find her. She had poured herself onto those pages, and what was left was this calm, settled woman. A woman who had given her testimony and was now free. My peace confused him. He expected tears, expected rage, expected a negotiation. My silence was the negotiation. It was my terms. And my terms were simple. I am no longer a participant in your narrative. I found an apartment. It was small. It faced east. The morning light was glorious. I did not take much. My clothes. My books. The few things that were mine before I was a wee. I did not take the china. I did not take the heavy furniture. I took my silence. I took the new quiet I had cultivated. When I told him I was leaving, he did not protest. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table, and he cried. They were silent tears for him. They were for the life he thought he had. The life he now saw was a mirage. They were not for me. I felt no triumph watching them. I felt a distant pity, like watching a sad play you've seen too many times. I packed. The sound of cardboard boxes being taped was the only sound in the house. The last morning I walked through the empty rooms. They were not my rooms anymore. They were shells. I went to the piano bench. It was closed. I did not open it. I left the key on its lid. A small brass period. Let him decide what to do with the hollow space. Let him fill it with his own understanding or his own regrets. It was no longer my container. Now in my own space the silence is complete. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of presence. My own presence. I can hear myself think. I can hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a clock, the distant bark of a dog. These sounds do not have to compete with the roar of his disregard. They are just sounds. They belong to me. The silence after the story is where you meet yourself. You have been so busy narrating the pain, so busy documenting the wrongs, that you forgot what you sounded like when you weren't telling that story. At first it is unnerving. The quiet feels vast. You might be tempted to fill it with noise, with distraction, with a new drama. But if you sit in it, you begin to hear the faint signals of a self returning. A desire for a certain food. A memory of a song. A sudden urge to buy a plant, to paint a wall, to walk a different route. I do not need a journal now. My thoughts are not refugees seeking asylum on a page. They are citizens of this quiet country. They can come and go as they please. Sometimes I speak them aloud to the empty room, just to hear their sound. Sometimes I let them float away on the sunlight. They are free, and so am I. He calls sometimes. His voice on the machine is hesitant. He asks how I am. He tells me about the house. He says he read another journal. He says he is sorry. I listen. I do not call back. My silence is not a punishment. It is a boundary. My story with him is in the past tense. I am living in the present. A present that is blessedly unrecorded. A present that is mine to feel, not to document for some future jury. The silence after the story is fertile. From it new things grow. Small things. I joined a library. I take a watercolor class on Tuesdays. My hands are stained with blues and golds, not blue ink. I made a friend. We have coffee. We talk about nothing of consequence. The sound of our laughter in the quiet of my apartment is a foreign beautiful sound. It does not need to be written down to be real. This is the final truth they never tell you about walking away. The hard part is not the leaving. The hard part is learning to live in the quiet you have fought so hard to win. Learning that your own company is not a sentence. It is a reprieve. The silence after the story is the rest of your life beginning. It is the blank page after the final chapter. And you are no longer a character being written by someone else's neglect. You are the author. And for now the author is resting. She is sitting in a pool of morning light listening to the silence. It is not empty. It is full of every possibility she once poured into a book and gave away. Now she keeps them. They are hers. And they are enough. The story is over. The living is just beginning. And it is so very quiet. And that quiet is the sweetest sound I have ever known. And so, my dear, we come to the end of this particular story. Not with a slam of a door, but with the soft, final click of a latch. Not with a declaration shouted from a hilltop, but with a quiet decision whispered to oneself over a cooling cup of tea. I have walked you through the years of blue journals, the heaviness of that mahogany bench, the ink of a disappearing woman, the morning of a long-awaited awakening, the quiet force of a reckoning delivered without a raised voice, and the profound, spacious silence that comes when the last page is finally turned. This was never a tale of vengeance. Vengeance is a fire that burns the one who carries it. This was a story of repatriation. Of bringing the self back home. Of gathering all the scattered, silent pieces of a life and presenting them, not as a weapon, but as a simple statement of account. This is what was. This is what I held. I am returning it to its source. The power I found, the power I hope you see, did not come from changing him. It came from the monumental act of finally seeing myself. Of acknowledging my own witness. Of believing that my quiet record of days was a valid, powerful testimony. The world often mistakes volume for strength. It is not so. The deepest strength is in the stillness that holds its shape under pressure. In the dignity that refuses to shatter, and instead, chooses to simply walk away, whole. If you are holding a silent story of your own, in your heart, in a drawer, in the quiet spaces between your smiles, I hope you hear this: your testimony matters. Your quiet observations are valid. The weight you carry is real. You do not have to set yourself on fire to prove you were burning. You can simply lay down the match. You can stop feeding the flame of another person's ignorance. You can take your oxygen, your spirit, your voice, your peace, and step into the clear, cool air of your own integrity. The journey from silence to liberation is walked in small, deliberate steps. One unsaid complaint acknowledged. One small, no, uttered. One truth written down for your eyes only. It is the slow, steady accumulation of self-respect. And one day, you will find you have accumulated enough to tip the scales. Enough to walk out the door on a sunny morning, not with drama, but with a profound sense of return. A return to yourself. Healing is not the loud parade of forgetting. It is the quiet integration of knowing. It is making peace with the story, not by rewriting the past, but by claiming the authority of your own present. It is building a new silence for yourself, one that is not imposed, but chosen. A sanctuary. So from my quiet room to yours, I send you this, the permission to close a book that no longer serves you. The courage to believe that your next chapter does not require the same characters. The faith that the silence on the other side of your pain is not empty. But waiting for you to fill it with the sound of your own breath, your own laugh, your own unedited life. My story is one of many. But the ending, my dear, is universal. It is the moment you realize the most powerful act of all is to gently, firmly, and forever, choose yourself. Go in peace. Go in quiet strength. Your story is yours to tell, and yours, when you are ready, to conclude. I am Auntie May. Thank you for listening.